Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 of our SaaS Monday community streaming event. And we're talking today on the topic of scaling. So, from startup to scale up, managing customer growth. I'm joined today with some of the usual suspects, Arwen and Bill and Kamal. I'll let them introduce themselves here in a second. But we also have a special guest star in Josh joining us today as well. Josh has spent the last 7 years with Confluent, which was one of the shining stars of true SaaS success, going from a concept and an idea about 8 or 9 years ago to a world-class global cloud business today. And it's been an amazing thing to see. And Josh was there for most of it, having spent the last 7 years there. So we are going to talk about scaling up, and so we have a lot of expertise on the call on that topic. And so as we go through, as we start to plan through that, I do want to give a second to let everyone kind of reintroduce themselves to the community real quick. So, Bill, do you want to start that off?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. Bill Tarr. I'm with the AWS SaaS Factory. So if you haven't seen us on here before, I sit on the technical side of the SaaS Factory and talk a lot about how we do tenant isolation, identity, all those other fun SaaS topics. Based out of San Diego, California. Nice to see everybody.
And Arwen?
Yeah, I was actually waiting for you to name Kamal or me as the next one. Hello, audience. As Michael, as you said, one of the usual suspects in the show. So my name is Ermin, sitting here in Munich, Germany, senior solutions architect also at AWS. I work primarily with startups, which also has a kind of, I have a kind of startup background, and I feel very comfortable in that area. And I think my expertise and my customer interaction hopefully will bring something to this topic, which actually talks about startups and how to scale. Kamal, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm also ex-AWS, ex-Confluent. I am now on a startup journey with OmniStraight, one of the founders at OmniStraight. We help. We are basically a control plane as a service, helping B2B founders to build their SaaS and helping folks on their journey.
Love it. And Josh, I don't know if you also want to, break the news about, any changes coming up in your life. I'm just going to leave it out there in case you want to throw that out there.
The last day, sure. So my name is Josh Treichel. I've been with Confluent for about 7.5 years. Like Coop said, when I joined, we didn't even have a cloud product, and now our cloud product is over half of $1 billion run rate business. So I've definitely seen it now. I currently run cloud partnerships. I was actually one of the first support engineers at Confluent. So I was directly supporting global customers and running, seeing all their challenges. So it's been quite a journey. Super, super grateful. I'm moving to run partnerships at a company called ChainGuard. Super excited. Software supply chain. I'm thinking about making sure people are deploying secure software, and pretty pumped about it. Pumped to get back into the kind of the build stage. So, but also I think for this, like, Confluent story is like really. I think what most companies want, right? Like that is what they want, right? Like they have this cloud product, it's based on something, and like, how do I scale that thing to tens of thousands of users and hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely what you want, because I think if you don't know Jay and the rest of the Confluent founders, they're pretty amazing and special humans. So everyone kind of eventually kind of wants that goal in life, and they learned a lot of things the hard way, and that's one of the things that we're going to talk through here. And so I've broken the topic up into two areas. One is, how do you work with your customer to make sure that their environment, their cloud is going to be ready for you, because when you're implementing a new cloud service, you're just as dependent on their configurations and their service to be ready for to be ready to enable your success as your system itself. And so we're going to talk through topics on scaling that up as well as sharing that responsibility, and where's the line between pre-sales and support, and where's the line between support and consulting? And those are all questions that startups are going to have to struggle through. Before we get there, though, I do kind of want to talk through kind of lessons we've all learned, as well as lessons we're seeing right now in terms of where customers start, and why some of those early choices that startups make, which are great choices for most startups, will eventually cause them to not be able to scale correctly or at space. And so, Kamal, I'm actually going to throw the first one over to you, because you see it a lot and you know it a lot. But one of the things that we see a lot of customers do, you and I, and talking to these founders, is they go out and just kind of do the first install kind of manually, and that's perfectly fine. But why does that happen, and then how do they start getting around that?
I think typically what the way it happens is, like, customers build their application, or the models, or some version of agent, with all the agentic world that we are living in. I think the challenge is that people or customers are themselves are discovering how the customers will consume it, and we also live in a dynamic environment. Remember, then with all the changes that are happening, you take a look at just in the political environment, that has a repercussion on how enterprises tends to consume software, and so it changes the way how industry is moving. I mean, one of the patterns, for example, what we have seen in the last 2 years is, 2 years ago, what we used to see most of the customers were okay deploying software in their hosted environment and building a SaaS such that the so-called control plane and app plane lives in the service provider's account. But now more and more enterprises are moving and shifting towards the model where the app plane lives inside their own account, for because of compliance reasons, because of the dynamics of how with AI agents, now we have thousands of agents. It's just practically infeasible from security point of view to ship out your data to thousands of vendors and put a control around it. And so rather than them bringing or giving the data, so to get the management around it, or for some compute or value on top of data, you basically bring the value to in-house, and we've seen that as a result of it. So I think the broad answer is that, like, the founders are themselves discovering, they're themselves figuring it out. The environment around them is also evolving, so they are trying to find the product market fit. And the reality is that there is no one silver bullet here. And you take a look at any successful company, any successful cloud providers, they offer different services in different shapes and form. And the brutal reality, or at the end of the day, we have to meet where our customers are, and we have to offer solutions in packages or package them in shapes and form along with pricing that will suit the customer needs. And they will unless you are one of a unique kind and just happens to have everything just lined up perfectly, most of the time, 99% of the time, you will end up with several flavor of it, whether that means being available on different clouds, being available in different regions, being able to deploy in different cloud accounts, being able to support different architectures, being able to support different networking configurations. So there are numerous dimensions here in play, and and they are coming from different vantage points. So as a founder, you need to stay open, and you are still self-discovering, and that's how you figuring it out. Okay, where are our customers, and what brackets or what packaging and pricing and shape and form will make sense.
Love it. I agree. And a couple of words you used a couple of times in there is incredibly important, because I think almost all founders find the first 5 or 6 customer installs they do are unique, and each one of those customer installs are slightly different. And that can cause some problems down the road. And so, Bill, one of the things you've kind of talked to me over the course of the years is, especially in terms of why SaaS and the rest, is incurring technical debt. And so when all of your first customer installs are unique and the next customer is unique as well, what do you mean by technical debt when that happens?
Yeah, and I wish every startup came equipped with like a meter that was over their head, like how much technical debt that they've actually accumulated. And you can just watch it rolling as they're building. And like, okay, you're up to like 10. You got to go stop and reduce some of that technical debt. But unfortunately, we don't get that meter, right? We all have to sort of make our own assessments of these things. I always kind of like to couch it in terms of their phase, right? Where they're at in their journey. If I'm talking to a startup, I want to be really careful not to get them away from their core product idea. Like I want that startup really focused, laser focused on the value they're adding to their customers. And I don't want them distracted by me coming in and telling them, hey, you're going to have to think about being in another region, or you're going to have to think about this. Don't worry about that future state. You're going to develop some technical debt. And that technical debt, like going to your question of like what that really is, oftentimes it's just not really being ready to see around the next corner, right? You've got to be focused where you are. But that corner is going to come up on you really quickly if you're not careful, right? That other region, that whale of a customer who's going to demand you deploy into their accounts, those things will sneak up on you really fast. That's why I think talking to experienced people in the SaaS marketplace, people who've been there and done this before, is really helpful, so that you can kind of, you won't necessarily see around that corner. Things will always come out of left field and smash you in the head and be like, okay, well, now we're stopping everything we're doing and we're going to go focus on this other thing. Kamal just mentioned agentic AI. I think that really came out of left field for a lot of people, and a lot of people are scrambling to catch up and making sure that they catch that hot wave. That's always going to happen, but the best you can do, really, in terms of this technical debt, is keep asking, keep looking for what's next, talking to experienced people and saying like, oh, our enterprise customers are going to ask us for this. Or, hey, as we move up or down market, we're going to have to change our software to do this. Start to anticipate those things and acknowledge them as technical debt. Start to keep track like, okay, I know we can't do this today, but I have customers asking me for this. Let's put this on the backlog and figure out how we're going to actually do this. Not just throw it into that backlog that no one ever gets to and opens up, because we've all got those, but the actual like technical debt. Like this is something we're going to have to get to. And then if we understand our North Star metric, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to grow? Are we trying to drive revenue? Are we trying to open up new markets? Whatever that North Star metric is that we're driving toward, we should figure out what are those strategies we have to do. What's the technical debt we've got to take care of now to get to those North Star metrics? That's how I think about a technical debt anyway. But like I said, it can come in a lot of different flavors. So that's, we'll leave that somewhat open and let some other people pick that one up too.
Well, I think there's a longer term threat there too, which is we've seen a number of SaaS companies silently become consulting companies behind the scenes. And so their SaaS business gets smaller and smaller and the consulting business gets bigger and bigger. And if that's the way you want to go to market, that's fine. But we found that that's not what the market rewards from a valuation perspective, and does not allow you to scale. And so I think there's a long list, and I have friends who worked at most of them, so I'm not gonna call them out by name because I don't want to get in trouble with them. But there's a long list of companies who always pretended to be SaaS, but they were always consulting behind the scenes because they let that technical debt get so big, and they let every customer deployment be so unique that they were never actually able to benefit from the automations that SaaS provides. And so as we kind of move past technical debt and the rest, I do want to start talking about we're going to split the conversation into two. So we're going to have a little bit of conversation. The second half of the conversation will be around architecting your SaaS for future vision and things along those lines, and we'll talk about that in a second. But let's start with what Kamal said: meeting your customers where they are. And where they are is they have a cloud environment. They're going to have data and things in their cloud environment. When you start to deploy those first couple of customers, you're going to need to work with the customer to figure out how to link their cloud environment to your cloud environment, and that often involves a lot of hand-holding. And so, Josh, I know that's something you did from the very early days at Confluent, from the very first customers there where you guys were, dependent on calling the engineering team and the engineers were there with you, all the way down to where Confluent is now, which is a pretty well-oiled machine where a customer says, hey, I want the Confluent Cloud Service, and you say, sure, how much, where, and when. That's a pretty, well thought out and structured process to get there. But can you kind of talk through those early days of, how do you start building out the documentation and everything else of, hey, I know this is my SaaS service, but here's all the things you need to do in your environment to be ready for something like Confluent?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, it was interesting, Bill, when you're talking about technical debt and you got to focus on your product. Like it's tough with the balance of like, you do need to do things that are unscalable when you start, right? Because if you focus too much on the scale part, you might never get to the part where your customers actually find value out of the product differentiation. So that's tough. I think on the so like I was on our support team where we work close with engineering and like build that out. I think what I would say is in the beginning, it is very white glove. Like I think it's important that every early customer has a positive experience, right? And you're not going to be able to scale that, and that's kind of okay, right? But that's where you figure out like, what documentation do I need? What can I automate? Like where are the bottlenecks? Like what are the commonalities between these customers, right? So like, while the white glove is like really good for the customer, it's also really good for you because you get to see like exactly what challenges they have and like where you need to invest in automation, scaling, right? Like, I think from our perspective, like getting our engineering team, I mean, like even one of our founders, June, used to come on calls, right? Because like in the early days, it's like all hands on deck. But I think it's actually valuable for the company as much as it is for the customer. And then you can start thinking about like, like what technical debt am I okay taking on? Right. And then like, where do I feel like this is a challenge that every customer is going to have. We need to find like a scalable solution because we're going to be a big company, right? Like we're going to be a big company. And so, I think in the beginning, what I would just say is like, do things that are unscalable, but like while you're doing them, think about like how you're going to scale them. Right. That'd be my take.
I love that a lot. Armin, you talk to a lot of founders and startups on a daily basis, and a lot of them you're talking to are kind of in the cusp of they've been doing things on an unscalable way. They kind of need to get to the scalable way. Do you kind of have insights of when does a company start to cross that threshold, and also, by the way, how can AWS help? And so, I mean, I gotta believe there's a lot of services and programs and processes there. So when the company's making that transition, is there trends you're seeing there?
Yeah. So back to what actually you were talking before, right? So the startup, especially on the early stage, as soon as they start, they have that pressure to win customers, right? So that's the thing. And then B2B startups, they usually aim large customers and trying to land that enterprise deal, right? And latest then they face that pressure to have silo deployment, which could be okay, right? Or a kind of unique version for that particular customer, or to develop something different, which then actually could go in a wrong direction in a sense of having too many unique versions of your application plane, right? And I think Mike, you or someone actually mentioned that, what is that, red light? When do we actually should start looking into our application and consolidate the technical debt? If you want to be SaaS, right? So that number for me would be 1, right? So if you cannot you cannot go in a direction, right, to start having different application planes or different version of application planes across your customer, sooner or later you will pay that price of not consolidating that. And there are 2 things that I see there, right? One is actually difference in features, which is solvable, right? And this is actually where me as a solutions architect at AWS try to kind of direct my customers in a direction of feature flags or consolidating automating deployments and things like that. The other one is sooner or later, independently, where do you want to host your application, you will have one big enterprise who will say, okay, that's all nice, Hermin, but I would like your application plane to be hosted in my cloud, at my cloud provider, or on premise, because I don't want my data to leave my data center, right? So latest when that happened, I never saw a startup who actually, unless they're big, right, and then they're not early stage startup anymore, who actually would actually push on that deal. So we would all kind of go in a direction of going there. Now back to your question of how we can help, right? How cloud providers can help. Speaking about AWS, so we have something which is called concept. Concept is called SaaS Anywhere. Bill, I think you know it. So the whole idea with SaaS is control of your application or of application plane, right? The moment when you lose complete control as a SaaS provider, the question the question is whether you're a SaaS provider, because SaaS is actually business functionality where me as a customer don't have control, and I pay in a subscription mode to a particular business functionality that is hosted by SaaS provider. Now, if my customer is forcing me, or my tenant is forcing me to deploy that SaaS, we have a concept of three different layers, right? Maybe you don't need to deploy the full application plane at your customers, and I don't want to go too technical on that, but maybe the solution could be, okay, you will just connect to their data source for that particular functionality, or you will actually host only part of your backend at customer and the rest you will keep, or you were gonna move the whole application plane, which is also okay. But then we come to the and this is actually where you guys are experts. Your control plane needs to be with you, right? So the control plane is something that SaaS provider needs to have. Ultimately, one control plane with control over all your data applications. So to sum up, right? So the sooner or later, you will, as a startup, if you want to grow, meet enterprise who will actually ask you to do something special and something different. That pressure can be also internal from the internal sales teams, but usually it comes from the customer, because you want to sell. Once when you go in that direction, you need to make sure that you don't have 1, 2, 3 different versions of your software. If you're a SaaS provider, it's only one version. And there are solutions and there are strategies of how you can actually still do it. The ultimate solution is keep your control plane under control, and reduce keep the control as over as much of control plane or as much of that deployment as you can, right? Don't just give up on the full control plane and send it to a customer location.
Love it. And so we are going to go into control plane next. Actually, after I do have one more question for Josh before we actually get into, hey, how do you, like as everyone said, keep your control plane under control? How do you design a control plane to allow your special customers to still be special? So Josh, one of the things that you have a unique experience with in the world is, you've led a lot of teams to build out the documentation necessary for a customer to be successful. And so, the first 5 or 6 deals that you were there, like you said, you brought the founder with you, you brought the engineering team, everyone was doing things, and you were kind of doing the hero mentality to get the first couple of customers installed, and that's okay. When you start making the transition to getting customers deployed, and you're expecting customers to do some of that work themselves, and your teams are out there building the documentation for the customers to do that. 7 years ago, I'm assuming that was all white papers. At some point we started adding videos in. Now there's, now there's these new concepts of LLMs, and no one's quite entirely sure where they're going to fit in the support model. What is, so where's that going? And is it still, very good documentation on the web, or are videos enough? Or do you have to have both? So is there anything changing there, or is it still just, we need to document the heck out of it?
It's a good question. I mean, I tend to think like you might need it all, because different people learn so differently. Like, I'm a great example. Like, I don't really read documentation. I'll just try something out and then like kind of run into issues, and then I guess Google the issue I got, right, and then hopefully they'll give me the answer somewhere. but I think some people really value like walkthroughs, videos, right? Like they want to be able to do it. I think one of the things we learned was from the support perspective, internally, the support team had internal wikis of like how to solve this problem for customers, or like they had this issue. This is how you solve that. And we started as best we could giving customers access to that. So like it was effectively like you want, like they're smart, right? Like we're working with very intelligent customers typically. And so you don't want to show them all of the nitty gritty details, but I do think you want to provide them as much detail as you can. And so to almost give them the like what is available from the support team's perspective, give them access to the wiki. And that's part of what they're paying for too, right? Like they're paying for you as a support individual. They're also paying for that access, right, to the latest and greatest and updated. We do now, like at Confluent, like we're integrated with Gen AI, like LLMs. We have an LLM that understands Confluent, understands how to like write Flink, how to write different types of like how to create connectors. So like in the product, you can say like, well, the product tries to do it for you better now, right? But also you can almost like talk to the product about like how you're trying to do something. I mean, ultimately the best documentation, just like the best code is like self-documenting code. Like the best documentation for product is just a really easy to use product, right? Like you need that much documentation to like connect the systems. You're probably going to lose a lot of people along the way. And that's why you're going to need that like white glove. I think like ultimately, like it needs to be relatively easy. And we see that all the time, right? Like customers are willing to pay for ease of use, right? Like there are products that are competitive to Confluent as an example, right? Just as one I know well, like data integration tools that have massive adoption. I would say they're less valuable, like less valuable to the customer products, but they're super easy to use, right? And so I do think that just like making products easy to use is the best documentation. Barring that, like what I would say is it's tough because there's so many different types of users, right? Are you creating documentation for an engineer that's setting it up, a user, right? Like so, that's a good word salad of a non-answer, but that's what I got.
By the
Michael,
way,
sorry, go ahead.
No, please go.
I love the idea of making your internal support wiki public, right? I used to work at an enterprise. We had a SaaS and we had huge wiki, support wiki, and you would actually know how to do stuff. And the one way how to use that wiki is also to support your backlog, because probably if you need to support it and you need to have a wiki, probably it's easy enough to solve the issues and also create features. But maybe also making some of those things public and or even nowadays better have a chatbot that actually will grab the data from that
chatbot like based off the support wiki, and that's like also where I think it's going to, right? Yeah, it's like the chatbot knows everything that's going on. So I think it's a pretty cool space, honestly. Right?
Yeah, I love the chatbot idea. I would challenge any SaaS company out there. Take somebody who doesn't know your product, put them in front of Cursor or Klein or Q, and just be like, hey, show me how to use my product. And if you can do that, if there's someone who doesn't know your product but is technical enough to use an IDE, can figure out how to use your product without any documentation, that's a pretty nice selling point. Because if you're talking about like product-led growth, that's the person who's going to be the first person who tries your product. That's the guy there on the floor is like, oh wow, this just made my life easier. I can use a local stack, or I can use ChainGuard, or I can use this tool, and I didn't have to go read about how to do it. I just asked my chat, and it built me a little sample project, and boom, now I'm using it. Now let me go talk to someone else about buying this for me because this tool is really cool. Like that to me, like that's like the new bar for ease of use in a SaaS product.
And
I think it's a different bar, but I do think there's a concern there too, which is to what Josh originally said. Confluent put all the documentation out, then they put the videos out, then they learned, then they published the wiki, then they built LLMs that was able to train off of all of that documentation they created and all that standardization of process that they created. And so I do want to go back to the original statement of technical debt and getting some consistency, because if all of your customer deployments are different, your LLM is going to give very, very bad information to the next customer because it's going to assume, well, that's how I did it for Boeing. Therefore, this is how I did it for Wells Fargo. No,
Right.
no, they're different. So to get to the point where your app is has a good experience for your customer, it needs to be polished and it needs to be consistent for every one of your customer deployments. And when you have a consistent app that's well built, well thought out, then it's pretty easy to wrap an LLM around them, and it's pretty easy to make your customers happy. But the problem is, as we stated, most of our customers nobody starts there. So the first couple of customers you get are going to be unique customers. Then once you get your unique customers, then you're moving to more of a SaaS model. As Erwin says, that should be happening on customer one. Josh is saying, hey, I don't care when it happens, it has to happen, but your first couple of customers have to win. I think both statements are true. But we know the next thing coming is you're going to have to put a control plane and you're going to have to put some consistent models around that. And so as it relates to scale and as it relates to starting, commonly, you've probably built more control planes than, well, I know you built more control planes than on this call, but you probably built more control planes than almost anybody else out there. I'd love to meet the person who's built more than you either way. But in starting a control plane and planning a control plane for scale and planning a control plane that will help with the first couple of customers with the understanding that you can still bring that to fruition, what should the founders be thinking?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that jumps out straight up. First, I will start from simply just echoing the point of Josh, right? Like it's really really important for the first half a dozen customers that you understand, like how your customers, as you may be in that space, you may be in that domain for working for 10 years, and you may think that all about that domain. You will be surprised that sometimes there's a big difference between knowing the domain and building an application for the domain, but versus the delivery model and how that software will be distributed and how your customers will consume. And so it's really, really important, even if you're very familiar with the domain, to validate the delivery models, what the general market. And don't assume that there's one size fits all here. The startups may have a very different requirement than the big broad enterprises. So, and there are other dimensions. For example, if you are in a place or building something which is more wider or across different verticals, then different verticals may have different requirements. So there are a lot of things in play here, and so I would, I'll start from simply saying that. The second thing I would say is that don't assume that they're doing the deployment and chapter over, right? That's just the start. That we used to call it AWS day zero. Even when we launch a service, anytime we call that's day zero. It's not even day one. And so I will encourage founders and community to think in a similar way, to think that that's just a start, and there is a lot more that goes in from not only just operational perspective, but also from providing the level of experience, whether that is feature update, whether that is security patches, whether that are those are software upgrades or infrastructure updates, whatever those things are. There's a lot that goes in beyond just initial provision. The third thing I would say is that don't think that everything is technology here. And when you are playing in the go-to-market model, you need to play your go-to-market and technology together, and you need to think about them together. If you're going to try to move one thing way advanced than the other, is basically saying that okay, you essentially build an engine, but you forgot to build the body, or you build the body, you forgot to build the engine, right? It's just not going to work. And if you're building an airplane, you have to have an engine, you have to have a body, otherwise you're not going to fly, right? And so that it's very, very super important to think about holistically here, and look at it not only from the technology perspective, but also from the pricing, go-to-market, and technology, all of them together. The last thing I would say is that architecture, which is people, and I'll go a little bit deeper into technology perspective, and I think people often underestimate the meeting the customer requirement. They think it's only one customer requirement, so they will develop for that. They think that, okay, I'm going to have only one environment, so production environment, I'll create that and be done with that. They forgot about, hey, I'm going to have tomorrow 100, 200, 1,000 developers, so they will need different environments and I have to deal with that. They forget about the concept of bringing even tenancy into the life cycle of provisioning or upgrades or billing or observability. They forget about realize, like, they need to understand and realize very deeply that multi-tenancy is embedded in each and every aspect of the software stack that they are building in here, and they need to plan it accordingly. They forget about the fact that the availability zones can fail, regions can fail, and so they fail for the accounting for that. And once you build something, a software stack for 5 years, it's really, really hard to go back and change that assumption that you completely started from there. They forget to account for the fact that the world around them is completely dynamic. Cloud providers are going to innovate. I mean, look at how many services cloud providers had 10 years ago and now. Look at the regulations that we had 10 years ago and now. Look at the industry, how they have moved 10 years ago and now. Will you see, does the MapReduce and Hadoop still exist? No. Who would have imagined that we will be living in this era 10 years ago, right? And so a lot is going to change. And so assuming that the 10 years from now is going to be the same as what is today and just planning for today is just not going to work. So what can you do? You can plan your architecture, you layer down and build proper microservices and proper abstraction, so you can plug and play those aspects that are going to change. Now you don't have to redesign the whole damn thing. If you're going to build like a monolith, you're going to pay the price of a monolith. So those are the things I would say I will highly encourage, just broad strokes. I'll love to have the panel to also contribute to this.
So a couple things I heard there is build for abstraction, which I think everyone on this call definitely agrees with, and then microservices, and don't build a monolith, don't build one thing. And so I think everyone agrees with that. And so speaking of abstraction, at the highest level, from a SaaS perspective, there's the abstraction of the control plane on one side, the data plane on the other. And so Bill, can you kind of walk through kind of some of your thinkings around abstraction as it relates to data plane, as well as planning for scale as it relates to data plane?
So abstraction for the data plane can mean a few different things in SaaS, right? So the first abstraction I want to think about is tenant isolation. A lot of times when I'm talking to SaaS customers early on, they imagine all of their customers being the same, right? They don't imagine there being some variety to their customers, different needs, different requirements. And one of the first areas that tends to pop out in is the relationship of security to cost, right? If they're just building completely silo applications and they think that that's all they're going for, they usually see a very small TAM, right? They're thinking, hey, we're only going after these 10 customers. That's all we need. That's almost never the real world case, right? If you could get those 10 customers and be happy, awesome, good for you. You'll get 3 of those customers. And then you're going to look at the other 500 customers that are out there and think, oh, maybe we should move down market. Well, those customers can't afford the solution you built, right? So that's one of, like, the first in terms of the inflection points of how we think about the diversity of the data plane. Tenant isolation is usually the very first one you're going to run into. Like, okay, I've got these smaller customers who want to use my solution. How do I move in that direction? Identity is another aspect of this, right? How do I manage the identity of my different customers? You might start off with a completely pooled solution and everyone's happy to enter their 10 users into your solution. And then you get your big whale and they come along like, we've got 10,000 users. We're not entering them into your solution. How do you're going to federate into our user story here. You're going to figure out how to make that connection. So, like, those are just a couple of the early points. Data is going to be another one, right? So as we get to the databases, once again, partitioning how we set up our data might be different for different customers. They might come with you might have a bank as a customer and they come with very specific instructions about how their data will be stored. And you're like, hey, we love DynamoDB. We've been using it. Wait, but you say, I can't put it in DynamoDB. It has to be encrypted this way, this type of data. You may get very specific requirements from customers. So, like, you have to be able to, again, Armin was making a great point about keeping software the same. Keep your software the same, find ways to deploy it in different ways for different customers. And that kind of goes back to things like pricing tiers, like thinking about your customers in terms of diverse group, how you break those down, and all back to your control plane as well. Like, so as you're thinking about these different type of data planes, if you have a flexible control plane, if you've built for different versions of things, being able to deploy different stacks, being able to manage different tiers of customers, you'll be able to manage those experiences in an extensible way. You'll be able to swap out and say, hey, this customer is going to move from this tier into this tier.
Exactly.
That means they're moving from a pooled solution, and I'm going to migrate them out to this silo. Are going to take them from this one cell where there were 100 customers in this cell and move them into this other cell where there's only 10 customers to reduce the noisy neighbor issues that they're experiencing. Things like that, they're hard to anticipate early on, right? You may not know what those are going to be, but if you've built your data plane flexibly, you've got that single version of the application. You can use configuration to change the experience for different tenants. You can do different deployments to change the experience for different tenants. Then that data plane is going to be flexible enough to allow you to go up and down market, go across regions, change your infrastructure patterns, whether you I've just mentioned the cell-based architecture. Nobody's starting with a cell-based architecture. Like, that's not the first thing you arrive on. It may come up for you, though. It might come up like a freight train where you realize, hey, I've got to start segmenting my customers out and sharding them across different experiences. So think of that as you're building your control plane and when you get to that point, but also as you're thinking about your application, remain flexible. Think about what you're deploying for your infrastructure as a base layer, and then how you're onboarding your tenants as a second layer. Keep those two concepts separate, and then you can change them and say, hey, I can continue to onboard customers, but I'm going to change the underlying infrastructure and how that emerges and what that looks like for my tenants. So just a few notes. There's a lot more, of course.
Love it.
Mike, can I just add a few things on this one, right? So, and I see regularly, and I guilty as charged, right? So we, as in the startup world, we start with the data plane, right? So this is actually the first, because you want to deliver features to your customers, and you go there, you deliver, and then you forget, Bill, you mentioned, you forget how to do tenant isolation, you forget, that you may have different tiers of customers, you forget that to handle identity very well, right? And then we go into, your first question, Mike, how to, we have that technical debt, right? Now we need to restructure and invest again, even more engineering time, which is actually, I'm talking a little bit from the CTO perspective, right? So, and I'm probably here the most kind of, technically radical when it comes to SaaS development. I always advise my customers, if possible, start with your control plane either immediately or early enough. And if you're starting with control plane, it doesn't need to be full-blown control plane that can do everything, but start maybe with onboarding process, right? Because in the onboarding process, you need to have all those kind of, services covered. From payment, you need to think about tenant isolation, you need to think about identity management and all those. So suddenly, right, so if you just think about how your customers will be onboarded, and even if you just deliver that as part of your control plane, you already will cover most of those issues and topics that Bill mentioned. So I'm kind of, constantly pushing for that control plane, and I know that this is actually not, control plane is not making money because it's not features for the customer, but it can potentially save you a lot of trouble if you start scaling.
Yeah, I have a long-standing. There's a long-standing phrase in the tech world: "Don't build the airplane in flight." And so, and the other thing, and I know this is kind of near and dear to Kamal's heart, which is a control plane is not a script. And so, if you're scripting things, that's not the same thing as a control plane. And so, one of the things that Kamal, I do want you to double click here, and if you wouldn't mind for me. One of the things you said earlier, which is, you got to plan for multi-tenancy from early stages. You need to add multi-tenancy early on. I know that's a coaching you give to a lot of startups, and so I wanted to, if we're saying, hey, here, start with a control plane early, and control plane means more than just a script. It also means, planning for customer self-service, and it also means for planning for multi-tenancy. Can you give us a little bit deeper on the multi-tenancy thoughts there?
Absolutely. I think it's such a great point. And I'll start from where I'll actually follow the lead of Armin. I think if you start with let's say customer onboarding. One of the first things the customers typically look for, okay, I have to set up an infrastructure. I have to set up my models or an app and configure it. And the first thing within that process is to, okay, so let's start from setting up the infrastructure. And typically what they do is write a Terraform script. Now, writing a Terraform script, Terraform is a great tool. And if you're doing it for one-time installations, it's a great, really great tool. And it has been out and for a long period. And now there's OpenTofu and other things. But when you think in terms of SaaS, it has no concept of tenant. It doesn't understand tenants. And now the other thing is, it assumes that the cloud services will never fail. And so if it is running and it fail, it's one thing that you're setting up the infrastructure once, but it's another thing when you're building a SaaS service and you're running hundreds and thousands of operations every day or even more, and things can fail over time. And when you are operating in a shared environment where you're trying to build infrastructure and have a shared infrastructure for different tenants, and you don't know which infrastructure belongs to which tenant, or you have failures and you left garbage in between, that's a recipe for disaster. Absolutely. Furthermore, the existing tools don't have a mechanism to go beyond provision. So it's a complete you can very quickly see just alone in the infrastructure how messy it is. And now you start building up the layers. Okay, now you start thinking about upgrades. So when you start thinking about upgrades, and now somebody who I haven't had an experience with SaaS will think naturally that, okay, well, what's how difficult it is? I'm coming from B2C world, like I have been doing. I will do some blue-green deployment and I will roll it out to all of my customers. Doesn't work. Guess what? You think that you will be able to deploy all of your customers at the same time and everything will be hunky-dory? No, not going to work. First of all, different customers are different and they're using your software in a very different way. And if you have just because your software may work for one doesn't mean that it will work for other. There are some functional characteristics of your software and there are non-functional characteristics of your software. And moreover, the customers on your software may be 100% fine. Let's say you have an amazing characteristics, and let's say you beat the odds of ever getting wrong, and you're 100% right. It's never going to happen in software world. We all know that. But let's say even that is true. The customer themselves have a requirement. They may have a tax day. They may have some Black Friday, Christmas, or other events. They can't wait for any deployment to come in and cause any interruption. And it may be, but the way they have built on top of it, and they may be assuming some pattern and made some assumption that was never true from your perspective, but they relied upon that assumption and all of a sudden broke the software stack built up on top of it, and that caused an outage, and that will be a humongous loss for them during the peak event or peak activity. And so they may not want upgrades during that time, and so they may want to vet every single upgrade very carefully during that period of time. That's another example. For example, now you start thinking about it. Start thinking about cost. Okay, would you not like to know how your customers are paying by revenue? Who is paying how much margins, and where your cost is allocating? Or would you treat your entire SaaS infrastructure? Yeah, every customer is the same. All of my customers I'll have the same pricing. There will be no discount. No, that's not true, right? And so there will be customers who will ask for humongous scale, and you will give them discounts. There will be customers, there will be some startups discounts. So you will have some variance. You will evolve your pricing over time. So get over the hump. Like living in the SaaS world is all about being dynamic, being able to discover, and that's why you need control plane to be able to adjust and follow those processes in a consistent way, and have a platform in place who can support you along the way. And so that means that the cost and putting the security controls, as Bill talked about, you start looking at backups. Like, are you going to just randomly put the backups for all the customers? You need to know which backup is for whom. You can't allow restoring the backup of somebody else to another tenant. Your next day your business is gone, essentially, right? So you take a look at every operation, from observability, from security, from billing, from patching and upgrades to provisioning, and others even, right? Like every aspect needs to understand multi-tenancy to its deepest core, and it needs to be persisted and it needs to be stored, and you can't just lose that data. The day you lose that data, the day you lose that information, that B2B business, your SaaS business is gone. It has no meaning, and you're risking your entire business. So it's as critical as it gets to not only embrace multi-tenancy, but also the persistence and the residency part of that information itself.
Love it. And
Well,
so,
can I ask you a question? A follow-up?
Yeah.
Hopefully, it didn't have. So when you have when I think about all the things you described that a control plane does, and there's companies like yours, right, Omnistrate, that provides that. Do you run into I run into a lot of engineers that love building stuff, right? And so it's kind of oh no, that's cool. I want to build that stuff. How do you think about that? What should people be building, right? Because we run into that with Kafka. People love to be Kafka engineers, right? And it's well, no, go buy Confluent. It actually better serves your business. So how do you think about that, right? Probably because it's not part of their core business. That's the ultimately they need all of these things you're describing, but it's probably not their core business. Is that the value prop of something like an Omnistrate?
That's exactly right. I mean, and just speaking of Omnistrate here, moving on a little bit of direction to answer Josh your question. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I would just further classify that. Look, history has been on the humankind, right? We started with operating system was not born on day one. People realized the pattern and said, this needs to be packaged together, and we came up with operating system. The databases didn't come on the day one. I mean, they were files, and people realized, oh my God, it's not a great tool for storing many records. And if I'm trying to do multi-tenant access, so I need something called database. Similarly, control plane, when we started back in 2005, 2010 era, right, and started building the control plane, that's the first generation control plane. The control planes got evolved over time more and more. And I think it in itself has become some sort of a cloud operating system now. And what we are basically saying that there are aspects of it, people have built it. It's been built hundreds and hundreds of times, thousands of times. And so why don't we just encapsulate the common bits of it, the undifferentiated bits of it? Yes, there might be some control plane pieces that you may have specific to your domain. Build on top of it. But you don't have to reinvent the 80% of it. This is just same common thing. It's if you architected it well, then you will need to have infrastructure management aspect. You will need to have metering, billing. You need to have multi-tenancy security controls. You will need to put some level of observability. You need to know the cost insights or your operational insights on what is happening in the fleet. You will need to provide some sort of deployment controls to your customers. So a lot of these things are common things, and nothing specific to the application, nothing specific to the software. But then, yes, for example, if you're building, I'll take an example of Confluent, right? How Connect will talk to Kafka, how KSQL will talk to Kafka, how the governance layer will work with Kafka. And yes, the stitching of that is domain specific. That can be built on top of a undifferentiated base. And so, build that control plane, because that is the core value from the open source software, right? Which is not there. And that is a value, differentiated value on top of an undifferentiated control plane. So our value proposition is basically saying, look, don't invest your time and energy on something. And we know that at Confluent, it took us 2-3 years, and we're still building. We still have a large team, and that undifferentiated pieces now go away, right? And I think we feel that a lot of redundancy in the industry, and this shouldn't be. World can be a better place by removing that redundancy.
Yeah,
we'll just focus on
And if I could jump in real quick, I do think that the build versus buy is one of the most, is one of the questions that every founder gets is, hey, how much of this should I do myself? How much should I buy? I think that's true in the control plane space. And I think, Kamal and I have a vested interest there and a lot of passion on that topic. But I think that's also true with questions within the data plane. And as I think Bill and I kind of are both chatting back and forth on Slack here saying, this should be a topic that we get a little bit more into in terms of tools and which ones should you build and which ones should you buy.
It's like all SaaS products, right? Because you could build a company with a bunch of SaaS products, or you could build stuff yourself, right? It's like which one? Yeah.
Exactly. And so with the fewer minutes left that we have in this, one of the tools that you can actually build versus buy is managing some of that open source from a security perspective, and that would be ChainGuard. And so I do want to actually give you the last little bit here, Josh, to talk about build versus buy around ChainGuard, because I mean it's a perfectly valid question too. And I don't want to put you on the spot because it's not till Tuesday.
I actually don't know. I'm gonna make it up, if they saw this. But I mean, the reason I thought it was really interesting is because I companies like Confluent was listed use it, and so it's a classic case of something that you need to do. So you have container images, libraries, VMs. They have let's CVEs, right? And so you have people consistently monitoring, cleaning up, fixing CVEs, right? And it's engineers, it's taking time, and it's expensive. And it's actually work nobody wants to do, right? And so it's well, that instead, just that problem is solved, right? It's not like it scans, it tells you the problem. It's just no, if you use this ChainGuard image, that problem doesn't exist anymore, right? So the CVEs don't exist. Your engineers can go work on more high value things. And that's really the value proposition. And with Confluent, that's actually the same value prop, right? You're trying to move data across your business. You could run your own Kafka, but then the engineers aren't building applications with the data. They're just running Kafka, right? And so use Confluent, right? And I think that's ultimately the interesting bit is some engineers really like being Kafka engineers, right? It's very cool. It's a differentiated skill set. Totally get it. I don't think many engineers want to be CVE engineers, right? I don't think they want to be I would say so I think that's where I was oh yeah, I've done that, but I don't want to do it. So I get the value prop very cleanly on that one.
I do think that's a spectacular tie into kind of everything that we're saying here, which is as a founder or a business person, you need to figure out what parts of the stack are differentiated to your company and to your property, to your value, and make sure that you're investing in that. I think we do see a number of founders who are really interested in something technically speaking. And so like you said, hey, I want to do Kafka. Great. But is you being a Kafka expert adding value to the company, or is it adding value to you as a person? And so understanding the difference between things that the engineer wants to do because they sound like fun, or things that are differentiated to the company and where the company should invest is a really hard choice that many founders need to face. And I think, Bill, I think we do have a topic here that we should kind of dive into, is how do you know when it's differentiated versus when it's not? And so
tune in next time.
Same bat time, same bat time. So I do want to thank everybody for joining in. A lively topic as always, and I learn every time I listen to you guys, so I hope our audience listens too. Josh, thank you so very much for joining and for your amazing insights you provided. Also, congrats on 7.5 years at one of the coolest startups out there in terms of Confluent. Having seen some of the Confluent story, I can attest a huge amount of their success was absolutely attributed to the contributions you made, and so they were lucky to have you on that journey. And ChainGuard is going to be very lucky to have you too.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Lots of fun, guys. We'll do it again if you'll have it.
Yeah, definitely.
See ya.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Bye.